whom of you flew United on a long haul? I tell you, that's an experience. Yeah. Okay, so we will have a great panel, Digital Identity for the Connected Customers, and I would like to invite first Marco Onero on stage. You know him already from Amersport. Marco Orenius. I would like to invite Wolfgang Decker from Accenture on stage. Wolfgang, thank you. And finally, Nick Hangartner from Swiss Sign. Welcome, Nick. Maybe you stand and I sit. So, first thing I do, ForgeRock is very close to the customer. I don't know why they did that. We are engaged very closely with our customers, so I moved close to the guys here. So
you can see all of them.
Oh, I talk about that on Friday.
Yeah.
So it's great to be here on stage. And before we dive a little bit into the topics, maybe we do a quick introduction. We have heard from Marco already, so I think we skip him. Maybe Wolfgang, you give us a short overview about your role and activities in Accenture.
Yeah, not sure if I should share too much details about Accenture. We are a 400,000 people company. In the horizontals, we care about technology, strategy, consulting, digital operations. And in the industries, we care about the client business as such, which is financial services, products, and so on. And in the regions, that's the third dimension, we provide facilities and people. That's obvious. We have about 30-odd billion revenue recently, and out of this, about 40% in digital. I am part of Accenture Digital, and in the German-speaking markets, I'm responsible for our mobility and IoT business.
Okay, very interesting. So we will speak a little bit about IoT and identity in IoT during the discussion. Would like to add that you are as well implementing partner of ForgeRock around the world, so pleased to have you here. Nick, what's happening at Swiss Sign? Exciting things, and what role do you have in that new company?
In the new company, yeah. So since we're also not quite as big as Accenture, so we're around 50 people. And Swiss Sign is a company that offers a variety of services in the areas of identity, PKI, certificates, and other security-based services, primarily in the Swiss market, but also internationally. And I'm responsible in Swiss Sign for the technical strategy and for building or assembling basically solutions that we use to build platforms that then those services get offered on. And since around 3 weeks now, we're part of a joint venture between the Swiss Post and the Swiss National Railways with the goal of introducing the new generation of digital identity in the Swiss market within this year. So they're exciting times, and we live basically in between, like being a small startup in this space and having two large companies that back us in terms of the financial backing to introduce this new service.
Thank you, Nick. So I believe a good set of panel. We have a customer, we have somebody who's working with large companies, advising them on mobility, IoT, and digitization, and somebody who is building a company providing identity services with the backing of huge Swiss companies. So we do it the following. We talk a little bit. We will try to find some time for Q&A. So if you guys would like to ask something specific to one of the panelists, we try to have a few minutes at the end for some Q&A. So let's start with the general higher level discussion about digitization in general. So the question would be, so how is digitization really changing the customer experience and the services you deliver to your clients? And we have heard a little bit from Marco already, but what new things are happening and are enabled through digitization? Maybe we start with Wolfgang on that one.
I think you should not consider digitization as something to start and to end. It should be a state of mind. It's a continuous process. You are embarking onto a digitization journey, and then this would be there to last. We typically see changes in 3 areas, 3 dimensions. One area would be to improve operational efficiency, so cleaning up the machine room, so to say, getting rid of media breaks in between in the process chains, having end-to-end process automation in there, and so forth. That's one area, cleaning up the machine room. The other area deals with the customer, multi-channel integration, end-to-end integration. For the client processes, this could be in a banking scenario, even so I'm not a banker, but in a banking scenario it would be that within 10 minutes you open your bank account and you have your payment card in your hands rather than having a 14 days process before you open these things. It's the second area. And the large, truly disruptive area happens in between, so where you take advantage of a fully automated, fully optimized back office operations of your close interaction with your customer and come up with new service models. So typically we speak of a product to service transformation. That's very often a data-driven and analytics-driven product to service transformation, but this is where the true disruption happens.
Okay, do you see with the clients you are working on that one specific one is the one people tend to start with? Is it the customer side who really gets the intimacy and do the stuff, or is it more creating new services? Because cleaning up the machine room to me doesn't sound very sexy, yeah?
Well, I think it's something that's an absolute necessity. Maybe it's not sexy, but it's needed. Stick to the example of a banking client. If there is disruptive payment service and banking service providers operating current accounts for 1 million customers with maybe 500 employees, and then you look at the large domestic banks with hundreds of thousands of employees for maybe 3-4 times the number of retail customers. Yes, it's an unfair comparison because the product portfolio is very much different, but at the end of the day, you need to live up with that customer experience or you're out. There is no second chance to win back that customer. Maybe a bit about me private. Next to that I love guitar music, and I like to be here on stage, I do have 2 daughters. And they do not really care to have their account by a Sparkasse, a German savings bank, by a Deutsche Bank or Commerzbank or whatever. They do not really care. It would be much more fancy for them to open their current account with the Apple Bank or the Google Bank or the PayPal Bank or the Facebook Bank, whatever have you. And guess what? These institutions I just mentioned, they have a 10-year behavioral scoring history of my family because my kids use their technology day in, day out.
Oh. Yeah.
So how on earth does a savings bank want to win back my daughters to be their current account customer? That's really difficult. So I think you need to clean up the machine room to be up on par with the new market entrants, and then you can also work on creating new customer experience.
Great. I think, Marco, you and we spent some time last night, and I think you spoke and you presented as well today, a little bit about the way how you had to deal with the old engine, which had to be cleaned up. So any comments on what we just heard?
Yeah, I think that sounds familiar, and just to sort of follow up on that, we're digital, I think, is misrepresentative of the change, because really I think it's more broadly speaking, the market is changing and behaviors are changing. So yes, it's, the technology itself is allowing for this. And from our perspective, we kind of look at this in terms of like 3 variables. One is obviously technology, so we've got to put in some new systems in order to be able to manage better and actually be able to handle information like I explained. The other is processes. So our processes need to be reinvented, if you will. I mean, one example is that not so long ago, our salesmen who basically represent all the different products and they go to the local Intersport, they had paper catalogs of all the products. And kind of the business dealing was done there in terms of like sales and orders and what have you. Obviously that's gone digital, but not only that, but our retail partners like Intersport are demanding digital assets 100% almost live updates as you get sort of upgrades to product details and what have you, in order for them to facilitate, for example, their e-commerce. So our process is completely re-engineered. And then ultimately the third variable is people. We know we don't have all the skill sets in place moving from sort of the old way of doing business to a new way of doing business. And one can debate, you know, just how many people or salesmen in that kind of a new process scenario are going to be doing the same kind of job. So we have to look at it 100% over renewing ourselves as a company in this new world.
Wow.
May I add one more example to this? Look at fully autonomous cars, of autonomous driving cars. As of today, a car is something where two people sit next to each other, three in the second row, looking into one direction. Once a car is driving fully autonomously, why would this paradigm be that way? Why would you want to look into one direction if the car does it all? It's a massage place, it's an office, it's a pizza place, it's a playground if you travel with children. But once the car takes care of everything else, the buying criteria, the value proposition of having a car, of being transported, is totally different, because it will most likely anyhow not be faster than 60 kilometers per hour.
Yeah.
And you will not care, you will not even look outside, it just does the thing on its own. So what happens to the current buying patterns? What happens to the current marketing propositions of the current car manufacturers?
Right, good example. So Nick, you are now, I learned 50 people, you don't have this engine which has to be cleaned up, you can do everything from scratch. So talk a little bit about your digitization and how you would like to drive new services to your clients.
Yeah, well, to add what Wolfgang and Mark already said, what we're seeing is that the need for an identity that can not only be used within the context of one company, but also in the context with several different companies. So the boundaries basically and the permutations of how identity is used is increasing manyfold. And that's obviously, as a service provider, that's a challenge obviously to cater for that. And basically demands just from an identity solution the capability to adapt to the context that the identity is being used. So we saw examples in the previous presentation where we don't want to go from verified identity in the first step, in the first customer contact, but basically only just get information as is required in the context of where the identity is being used. And on the other hand, if someone's opening a bank account, then the solution has to be able to adapt to that and then provide or even gather that information from the user in the context of that specific transaction.
Mm-hmm. And what is your goal? What do you want? How would you like to see SwissSign be positioned in the market in a few years? You know, what would be a measure of success?
Well, the one measure of success, and that's the reason why, another reason why we have backing from large companies, is basically the chicken or egg situation in terms of existing identities. So what we're doing is, by combining identities both in the post and the SBB, we basically reach a critical mass of identities that are already onboarded, so that makes it basically attractive for relying parties or companies and organizations to tap into that potential and then be able to sell services and move processes online more easily. Mm-hmm. And the focus at the moment is for the Swiss market, both for simple identity services and for verified identity that can then be used for instance, for signing contracts.
I have seen you being very excited during Herman's presentation as he spoke about the German DAX companies creating such a company. So what do you think about that, in context as well with SwissSign?
Well, we'll try and do it better, basically. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot of competition. There's also, I mean, there are all sorts of initiatives now, not only from the private commercial companies, but also from the government. So in Switzerland, specifically, there's an initiative from the federal government with an electronic ID. And basically, we're giving our input there to make that and align that also on a European level, so that we and our customers not only can reach the Swiss market, but also reach international markets. So there are interesting developments also on the legislation side, for instance, with the EID and then ADOS in the context of digital signature, that basically allows for that to happen. But it is certainly a challenge, I mean, particularly for the authorities, because it's very much a cultural change, and I think we've heard a lot about that from the other speakers.
So that leads me to a question for the group. So we have heard Felix from Gartner talking about, he called it light sign-in with Facebook and Google's. I personally never do that. I'm old school with ForgeRock. I have now my single sign-on to the system. That's great. But I don't do that. And we see companies like SwissSign or other companies are really trying to establish another force. Do you in the group believe that we will see in a few years a situation where those type of companies are really helping in a more trusted way people to connect to things, and that the power of the Facebook and Googles will diminish? Marco?
I think the consumer uptake of anything that's easy is going to be the key driver. But if we were to see, say, a catastrophic failure on the part of a Facebook or something, I think a lot of consumers would be very concerned, and it might open up the marketplace to maybe something that might be called a more secure standard. But who and what could that be? I don't know. And I think looking at this from the perspective of sort of a global company, I mean, Facebook and Google don't operate in China. They have different players, however, doing the very similar thing. So is there reason to believe, for example, that some of maybe the Alibabas of this world will actually emigrate into, say, Western Europe with their solutions? Who do you trust? Mm-hmm. And should we then sort of, I mean, one of the sort of scenarios that I am using to drive our sort of architectural thinking is that because of these regulatory issues and because of basically consumer sentiments, we may yet see a time when not only does China sort of demand that the local population is managed and secured and identified within those borders, but we could very well see a disruption between the Americas and Europe, for example. And there we would need to be able to create something that would be, say, European for European citizens and something in America for Americans, and not have data travel freely, or for that matter, have identities shared. And would there be a sort of a transnational partner that would need to be established to allow for it? Because the consumers are going to do it anyway. But as a company, you're bound by certain rules. Mm. So the politics plays a huge role in this. It's not a technology question, and therefore it's very difficult to answer as to what should you sort of build or scenario plan for. And the only way we're approaching this is that we design our systems in such a way that if this were to happen, how would we then adopt?
Mm. Good. Wolfgang, any comment from your side?
Well, that covers it pretty nicely from the strategic perspective. So let me answer it from the service provider's perspective. I think many organizations that move into the digital space, they struggle providing regulatory grade enrollment processes and KYC information. Yet this is absolutely essential in many cases. So two challenges: either, let's say, the local public transit Münchner Verkehrsbetriebe, they build up their own KYC department, which they typically didn't need the last 150 years, or there is an emerging identity provider where you could subscribe on the identity of an individual.
Right.
And I think the last one would truly help the society and the economy to grow into these new areas.
Nick, any comment from your side? Will you replace Google and Facebook in the near future? Yeah, not only in Switzerland?
Well, I think certainly for some processes and transactions we will. I mean, as already been mentioned, it's a question of trust and particularly for high value transactions and an identification that requires some more physical even form of identification. That's something that is very difficult to scale outside a country today. I mean, obviously with new technology like web ident and other capabilities are being introduced, but in terms of regulatory requirements, for instance, in Switzerland, that's up till now only allowed, well, it's not allowed per se, it's only allowed for specific transactions. So if you want to sign a document today that's conform with the requirements in Switzerland for qualified signature, then you need to have face-to-face identification. So web ident is not yet, at least, not yet accepted. So I think for us, at least, that's at least a window of opportunity to position ourselves basically on the high end of the scale in terms of regulatory requirements, and at the same time attempt to basically, I'd say, copy, or in terms of usability, provide a solution that's also easy to use, so like the Facebooks and the Googles.
Interesting. This brings me to regulation privacy. So we all know that GDPR is coming soon, 2018. Other regulations in banking like PSD2 and so on and so forth, you know that better than I do. So I personally have met a lot of customers thinking about it, but I'm not sure about the level of understanding what's coming, how that is, and I would like to ask you guys, how do you judge the awareness in your company or the awareness in your customer base about these regulations and what the implications are? So who would like to start? Shall I pick? Marco, you want to talk?
Yeah, I can start. I think we're obviously taking it very seriously, and being a European, although multinational company, and then the fact that we actually store like health-related data of consumers. We're in the absolute bullseye. I guess if we're with financial technology, we could be even in a worse place. So we have to basically go right down to the very core of our thinking and basically start doing things right. In many ways, I think we've been there to a degree, but this is forcing us to reimagine kind of, okay, how should we do it? In fact, when we started this work about a year and a half ago now, we kind of looked at this as an opportunity of almost like a blank slate, in the sense that because we were at the same time embarking upon this future of becoming sort of the omnichannel, identity-based, consumer-centric company, we had the opportunity with this blank slate situation to kind of design privacy from day one, design privacy and security from day one, and we're on that path. If we were, and to a degree we're there, but if the situation was such that we had masses of legacy systems, none of it, in any way compromised or ready to be conforming to the new regulations, I think the work would be even harder. So there's lots to do, and at the same time, some of my colleagues say actually it's not that new in terms of what you were supposed to do already. It's just that it may get enforced. But again, it's not just a technology thing, it has a lot to do with processes. For example, we have, I think the favorite example is that you can go to a tennis club to try out, the new rackets, and then sign up to an email newsletter, for example. And maybe we're using an iPad application that was developed locally for that particular tennis club, but already there we're then basically trespassing easily. So we need to be able to roll out this kind of process and the mechanics for capturing it in due time to be absolutely compliant, and it's a big task.
So Wolfgang, I know that you are not a GDPR expert, but regulations are happening in different places. Any comments how you see your clients or Accenture seeing the clients preparing themselves on these things coming?
Yeah, that's the me answer, not an Accenture answer, as my clients typically are industrial enterprises. I see this also as an opportunity. I mean, this is a common regulatory framework across, as long as we have the UK with us, 28 European nations, 510 million people. Common regulatory framework that should also help to deploy new services. And a new service on a mobile device is by definition not bound to geography. So you need to be able to address this. So I think it's next to a regulatory burden, which it might be in the beginning. In particular, if you have lots of legacy, I think it's an opportunity to create really European services.
Okay, interesting. Nick, any comment from you?
So, yeah, I mean, as I was mentioning before, both GDPR, to follow on from what Wolfgang's saying, GDPR and ADOS in the area of electronic signature is something that allows, as an enabler, to address a larger market. And in terms of supporting that, I think, well, it's similar to what Marco said in terms of the solution we're building now. We're able to build those capabilities directly into it. So for the solutions that we're offering to our customers and that the clients of our customers are then using, that's obviously a very key factor, and we're building that in using also obviously technology that's available to do that in the various protocols, OpenID Connect and what have you. On an internal, the internal view is obviously a bit more complex, even for a company as small as we are, with 50 people. You know, just the fact that we have several business units and customer touch points, I think basically there's more work to do than in the solutions that we actually offer to our customers in terms of catching up.
Yeah, interesting. So interesting too, or all of you have really turned one part of Felix's presentation. You added something, you know. Felix spoke about risk and privacy and those type of things, but he didn't add the opportunity to it, you know. So with many clients and prospects I was talking in that role, in other roles earlier, you know, they translate it not just into a problem where you have to comply to something, they just see it as an opportunity. You said we could define our privacy and so on and so forth. And I believe that is a right approach, and we are driving that as ForgeRock. We are pretty much driving an initiative called User Managed Access, which is essential to implement GDPR or PSD2 technologies. So you can see a lot of good solutions from ForgeRock helping it to transform it into an opportunity instead just to comply to legislation. So let's move away from that topic and let's move into another one. So a hot topic, you know, the connected devices, IoT, 20 billion, 40 billion, you know, everybody is presenting huge numbers of connected devices. We all remember the DDoS attack which happened a few months ago. I think that was a wake-up call for many people, where somebody used fridges and whatever devices to really attack the network, and services around the globe were out of service, you know, and this is big, you know. So this leads me to a question. I will start with Wolfgang because he is a subject matter expert in IoT. So how do you see that IoT is really impacting customers, and what is it doing within those organizations, and how do they think about it, and how is identity and managing the identities of devices really driving them forward?
Well, many questions in one.
Make it short.
Okay. I think embarking onto IoT use cases for value, not just displaying machine data, but creating value out of it, is something that forces the organization to work together. To highlight this with a brief example, at a workshop in our IoT lab in Garching, which is a factory hall, basically, with a large group of clients, all from one organization. And in the first break, and we had only our first name tag with us, and in the first break, one of the guys approached me and said, "Wolfgang, are you a colleague or are you a client? Are you a consultant?" Scratched my head, what an odd question. And then I realized, firstly, working together in such an ambience eliminates the barriers between a consultant and a client, which is good. And second, which is bad, the client organization doesn't talk to each other. IT, enterprise IT, ERP system owners don't like the operating IT, the operational IT system owners, because the manufacturing guys believe that IT has no clue about production, and production thinks that IT is only disturbing the world they live in. But at the end of the day, they both can learn a lot from each other. IT is typically very well documented, OT is not. IT has a maintenance window, OT doesn't have. So I think there are ways to collaborate, to learn from each other, and this is what is one of the biggest challenges in the IoT world today. Else, if you just have a deep integration into the machine, have some nice analytics on top, and display some data, but do not integrate end-to-end in the overall value chain, you're missing out a huge portion of the value proposition that IoT has to deliver.
Okay. Marco, I think you already spoke about your things. We have seen some things. Any additional comments?
Yeah, I think on the IoT thing, although we have products out there and we're thinking about how they should work together, and you know, obviously thinking about things like product-specific identities and how they could be switched on and off. For example, my favorite example is if you were to, in the future, use rental skis, and you would want these skis to be connected to fill your day with sensor data of speed and slope and what have you. But then you return them, and you wouldn't want your data to sit in the skis anymore. And of course, the rental business wants them to be empty for the next person. So how does that pairing of ski identities and your data identities happen and then go away securely? So we kind of need to write APIs and algorithms and standardize a lot of that stuff, which is how we're organized today. But it's really early days. And it's unclear at this point in time who is going to write what kind of standards and what company is in a position to actually dictate standards, for example, for skis. Because the variance out there is that you probably won't be able to create a walled garden for your IoT products or product ecosystem, but it's going to be a connection between yours and your competitors' products in order to serve the greater good. So we are basically engineering towards flexibility, but at the same time, it's a moving target right now.
So I would like to add another piece to the IT-OT discussion, because we have two different worlds, different languages, different things happening between OT and IT. And I would like to talk a little bit about the edge itself, because we have seen DDoS, we have seen edge devices doing bad things, and on top of that, we have connections latency, which doesn't allow that everything gets done centrally. So any take on how the edge could be take some of the responsibilities for security, for identity management in creating this ecosystem between the edge, and I call it the cloud. Nick, you would like to start?
Well, if I can comment on that,
yeah. Sure.
I mean, for me, identity is obviously it's key to be able to manage and to the relationships between people and devices. But I think there's, anyone who's gone to the internet search of IoT, the platform, and then found out that you can connect to a wind turbine somewhere in the States and actually access the login portal to control it. I mean, it basically shows that somehow there's quite a lot of work that still needs to be done. And I think in a way, I find that for the people implementing those kind of devices and applications for them, security should be as easy as the people that are actually using those devices at home, and that today is certainly not the case. Although they are interesting developers in that area with TEE and TPE. So basically, capabilities built in on a chip level on the one hand, and on the other hand, basically new protocols. Well, there's work actually being done in Switzerland in the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich with Cyan, a new internet protocol that basically allows you to communicate and know where you're sending your data to, which today is actually quite a challenge. So And on the other hand, for us, particularly in the area of PKI, it's also a new opportunity. We're seeing there a lot of interest in basically using certificates to secure those types of communications. But overall, I think it's still a lot of groundwork to do.
Agree. Wolfgang, you would like to add something on the
Yeah, I think it's obvious that you need edge intelligence to avoid critical processes or critical actions being on a legacy path, on a latency path to a cloud impact. That's obvious. But on the other hand, and this is particular for my manufacturing and industry clients, a large part of the installed base, the so-called brownfield, is sometimes 30, 40 years old. And these machines got some upgrades in between, but they're still up and running, nicely running. And if at all, these machines have been built for local connectivity only. There is no human-machine interface to insert credentials, to update credentials. There's no OTA connectivity to deploy and manage certificates or such things. So in order to securely connect these machines, these devices to the cloud, you definitely need not only edge intelligence, but you also need edge security.
So here's the good news coming. So we just announced IoT edge security solutions, which is in beta actually with some of our developers. And we are addressing those topics, you know, the brownfields, the different language these devices are talking, and integrating them into the identity management and security suite we are offering on the market. So very, very interesting. So with that, I move to the last question I would like to add, and we heard a little bit about that. So, and that's a challenge we have as well sometimes, you know, dealing with customers and prospects, you know, who is really taking decisions? To whom do you talk if you drive digitization, identity management, big IoT projects forward? Is it the CIO? Is it the CTO? We have CTO here. What is it? And what challenges do you see within companies to really drive those things forward in a very advanced manner? Because you can't lose time, I think, actually. Share your experience. How is it working with you guys and with your customers? Would like to start? Marco, you?
Well, I think for us, I joined Armor Sports 2.5 years ago now, and one of the sort of questions I had at the time was that, is this company ready? And I was interviewed by the group CEO as well, and basically what I saw had been a long time coming in the sense of preparatory discussions and work. But today, it goes all the way up to our CEO, and the commitment is there, the support is there. We have, like I said, we've a year and a half ago we got a CDO, and his role is expanding within the top management team. So there's visibility, there's commitment, there's engagement, and there's funding, which is of course important. We're not perfect at terms of, you know, allocating funding, especially the long-term development funding. It's kind of not in the culture of the company for these kinds of projects, but we're getting there. And however, top management may be committed, but there's a lot of other people who are feeling that this is not necessarily in their comfort zone. And they have difficulty understanding terminology, they have difficulty understanding impact, so there's a lot of internal sales that has to take place, and I think that's, I was alluding in my presentation, one of the things that will be taking a lot of time from individuals such as myself to educate and change the culture.
Thanks, Marco. Wolfgang, any comment from you on that topic?
There's not much to add, I think. It's crucial to have top management backing and support, else you should not start. There's obviously particularly the middle management layer that's really resistant to change. Coming with, we have never done it this way, and we always had our products in a certain way, and now these guys want to introduce services and new culture and rotation to the new. People are reluctant to change, and you learn, or you face often what I like to call the terror of experts in these discussions, where somebody truly believes that things have to be done very close to the way they've always been done, and not willing to embark on a paradigm shift. But I think you covered pretty much the key topics.
Nick?
Yeah, so, well, from my perspective, I mean, the fact that two large, more traditional organizations in Switzerland have invested in this topic shows that, for me, on a top management level, that the awareness is there. And I think with a lot of these topics, basically shows that a really holistic approach to business as a whole needs to happen, i.e. communication between all different departments and on all different levels, and basically means a culture change to approach this business in a way that's then successful.
Okay, thank you. Interesting insights. So with that, we are at the end of the question of the themes we plan to address. So I open up the panel for some Q&A. So if you would like to ask the colleagues here on stage something specific, feel free, come on. Herman, you have a question? Did you understand everything I told you? Absolutely. Good. So there's one.
So I have no microphone, I have a loud noise. Marco, could you provide us with some figures, how many dollars or euros you invested in your campaign, in your digitalization?
I just repeated in case, so how much dollars did Marco invest in his digitization strategy?
That's probably quite difficult to sort of break down in terms of exactly how much, or even as a percentage of total revenues, because obviously we've been building our sort of per brand e-commerce capabilities throughout the past years, and there are operational things that have to do with digitalization that ultimately you don't even see as a marketer. So I think it may be. Maybe we shouldn't sort of break down kind of a digital budget separately from the overall development and sort of transformation of the company, whether it be at that sort of the lower level SAP systems redesign or at the sort of web design that consumers see. Every piece has to come together and basically has to be a constant fueling. Basically our CEO says, you know, that how can this cost so much all the time? But I guess the bad news is that if you don't do it, then there's a good chance you'll be out of business entirely. So it should be seen maybe more as a sort of an overall funding of the overall development of the entire company than just a specific digital allocation. Although even in our internal things, it still goes in chunks. So buckets have names because people are comfortable with that, but. I'm not sure there's a figure that leaps to mind, but we're spending millions for sure.
So how do you measure then success? So how do you run your return on investment? Or what are the KPIs?
Some KPIs have been debated. So for example, with data analytics, it's how do we measure data analytics as a success story? And we're working on that. We're working on measuring what do we know today and how can we capture that information. There are kind of easy wins. So for example, you can see that if you do a smarter campaign based on, let's say, a good cohort of segments, then is the conversion rate better?
Sure.
And then you could basically extrapolate from there. But this is a difficult thing because there's no absolute truth when your entire business is changing. So we need to kind of establish the baselines and see how overall operational efficiency is getting better.
Right. Okay, any further questions in the audience? Oh, one more. Okay, here's a mic. A mic is coming. Microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have a question to Nick. I would like to know, do you see any challenges in the field of mobile security? And also in connection with the Internet of Things, the LoRa network, that kind of things. And if you see them, which are they and how do you cope with them?
Okay. Yes, well, there are challenges and considerable ones. I mean, one is, I guess, in a way, is not changed in terms of, particularly for customer-based identity scenarios. The devices that are being used aren't managed by us, and they're not managed by any other company. They're managed by the user. So that's something that with mobile devices basically just is more of a challenge. And to combat that, basically we are looking into using or other authentication factors, providing our own application on the device, so for soft token, and basically doing everything that we can. You know, there are all sorts of mechanisms that you can use, for instance, code obfuscation, making it difficult to debug whatever software is running on the device, in an attempt basically to mitigate those threats. Does that answer your question?
So there must be more, was the answer from the audience. Maybe you both connect during the breaks and exchange a little bit more, you know, it might be interesting. So with that, I believe we are at the end of the roundtable, Digital Identity for the Connected Consumer. We covered a broad space from the digitalization in general, about privacy, trust, regulation, IoT, and to who are influencing the decisions. I would like to thank Marco, Wolfgang, and Nick for the great contribution. It was a pleasure with sharing the stage with you. And thank you very much. Thank you.